Thank you for joining us on our journey here to preserve the history of mixed martial arts. When I wanted to take on this project, I needed help. I brought in one of my favorite matchmakers, Miguel Iterate, and the MMA detective, Mike Davis. So to do this, we've been able to preserve history. Welcome and enjoy.
Hey, Miguel Iterate back on the Lights Out podcast, and we're in deep dive territory, a return customer. And, since we took a little hiatus and we've come back, we've kind of rededicated to the old school guys. And, if we're in the old school, now we're joined by a professor here, actually, because this is Jerome. Folks, once again, I can't tell you enough how much this guy is a fountain of knowledge, and we're going to have some fun with the early part of his career. Mike, what do you think? Jeremy's back.
So Jeremy, I have got a small portion of your career broken down, and I've got about 15 pages of notes. I've even eliminated fights. So what we're going to do is I've interwoven some of the big MFS title fights, Robbie Lawler debut, Jens Pulver, things of that nature, into your career because whether you like to admit this or not, the fighters that were in those bouts had said that you were pretty much the architect of how they approached certain situations in the fight. And I thought it's kind of important to include that stuff.
Well, that's very kind of them to say, but I do my part. I like to train. I like to help people. So they're the one in the ring getting punched in the face.
Right.
Yeah, you're the quintessential teammate, though, I know Mike's going to take us early on. And I remember you even in the early days, like when, you were a relatively young fighter and you were still a great corner man. You were still a guy who would jump in and ref and do stuff like that. And, you had some promising guys even before you got to Miletich hanging around you. Mike, where are we going to start?
Oh, here. Let's talk about gyms. You start with Jesse Jones, one of your early training partners. We've got all of that down. But, Miguel, let's just start hot. Jeremy, you're a tried and true, proven professional that has fought all over the world against some of the biggest names. Your gym in Utah, how many pro fighters do you have out of it right now?
It fluctuates all the time. At one point I had a couple of dozen. Now I've got a new crop of mostly amateurs. I've got a couple of pros, but it's mostly the newer guys getting started again. People kind of go through cycles. They fight for a while, they retire, they move away,
All right. How many pro fighters travel to your gym for camps?
Not so much anymore. Again, it all kind of goes in cycles. At one point I had back when I was fighting regularly, right around the era when I fought Chuck, but Rich Franklin would come in, John Alessio came in quite a bit, Joe Stevenson came by, Jay Huron. We had a lot of tough guys that would come through and train. Joe Riggs come up and train with us. Joe Dirkson's a good friend of mine, trained with us a lot. So different era back then. Now, like I said, it's just I got a new crop of amateurs that we're raising, and I changed the focus in my gym a little bit. For the longest time, I really wanted to focus on training fighters. And that is awesome and rewarding. But I kind of feel like somewhere along the lines, I forgot the real purpose of martial arts is to try to help the people that need help. So I'm kind of trying to get back to that more. So the gym is a much more family feel now. I'm wanting to, I still train some people that want to fight, but mostly, I want people that need martial arts more than people that want to fight.
Dude, absolutely. I obviously respect that. But the real question is, when you've got gyms like Jackson Wink, Greg Nelson in Minnesota, guys that have proven to be good coaches, obviously, but have zero fighting background, does it bother you that you're not kind of thrown in the same category as them in terms of fight destination?
Really. I don't know. I guess, might bug me a little bit, but I don't really care that much. I'm happy with what I've done. And I'm happy helping the people that I'm helping now. I don't really think about that stuff too much.
It bothers me. Just so you know. It does. So, Miguel, let's start. March 1st, 1996. The event allegedly was held at the Atlanta Judo Academy. You fight another Midwest person, Rick Graveson.
Yeah.
How does that fight come about? It's obviously pretty far away from, I think you were in Nebraska at the time.
Yeah, I was in Omaha. Yeah. So that fight was a really strange event. And honestly, to this day, I don't even know all the details of how it came to be. But basically, I was training with my friends, Brian Dunn, who now I believe is the ABC commissioner. So we trained together. My brother Matt, Jesse Jones, as you said, a couple other guys. We were training, and we got contacted by a guy named, I believe his name was Tom Huggins, and he was a promoter, coordinator, matchmaker, something like that. And he said, "Hey, I'm in contact with these guys down in Atlanta. They're doing some fights. If you guys be interested in fighting, they'll fly you down there and take care of all that." So we jumped at the chance. The sport was still pretty new. It wasn't like it is now where, you're in an organization and they offer you a contract against a specified opponent, and then you negotiate money. This was Tom going, "Hey, do you guys want to fight? Like, we'll take you down to Atlanta and we'll fight." So we're like, "Yeah, sure." So we hop on a plane to Atlanta and we get down there. They put us up in a hotel room. I think they gave us $50 so we could buy some food. And then we all show up the night of the event. And that was it. I didn't know who I was fighting until he stepped onto the mat.
And did you know Graveson?
No. Mike, you're muted.
So that's where you met Graveson then.
Yeah, that's where I met him. I had no idea who he was. So all they did, go ahead.
Was there any audience at all? Because I've seen the video.
There was a little bit of an audience. It was really weird, man. Honestly, as we went down there, we were all pretty scared. I know I was scared. I was thinking that maybe we were walking into some kind of snuff film, because it was like that. It was scary. So they pick us up at the hotel in a limo, and they drive us down to the middle of the ghetto in Atlanta somewhere. And we pull up on this dark street with like burned out street lamps and shit like that. It was kind of sketchy. We go into this building, everything's closed. It's like 9:00 at night. Everything is closed. And we go into this, what looks to be like a giant metal utility shed. And we go in there and there's some mats in the corner, and there's like people in like tuxedos and evening gowns drinking champagne out of fancy glasses. One of them actually was the pro wrestler Diamond Dallas Page.
Oh, cool.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, he was at my first fight. But yeah, so there's like maybe a dozen people watching, and they had there was not even a cage. I mean, you've seen the video. It was just an open mat. And what they did is they had people with those old school like American Gladiator kicking shields that you would use to like block people. And they just had 3 or 4 of those guys that their job was to run around the edge. And if you guys got close, they would just shove you back to the middle. And it never really happened much. Everybody kind of stayed in the middle, but that was it. So we show up there and they're like, "Okay, you guys are about the same size, so you guys are going to fight. You guys are about the same size, so you guys will fight." Nobody knew anything about anybody's opponent. At least we didn't. And that was it. I ended up fighting Rick Graveson, and I was scared to death because he was a big, scary looking guy. So
in essence, they flew you guys in, paid for a hotel, $50. Like, I've seen this video. There seems to be more people on the street looking through the windows than there were actually in the place watching.
So you might have actually seen other videos. So that's another thing that was an interesting thing, because they did this several times. So I'm not sure. Have you seen my fight with Rick?
No, I saw Scott Ferozzo's, and it's listed on the same card.
Right, but that was a different location. So yeah. So I don't know how much of this is true, if any of it, but this is the story that I have heard kind of through the grapevine and kind of pieced together. So do you guys remember that show, Mars, Martial Arts Reality Superstars?
Of course.
The main event ended up being Murillo against Tom Erickson. Right?
Hey, dude, Tom Erickson, he gets criticized for being like boring. In my opinion, it's a masterful, incredible effort in regards to solving high-end jiu-jitsu in Murillo Bustamante's corner. To me, I can watch that all day long. To me, it's brilliance. Yeah.
So what I was told was that the people that did that show were the ones that were coordinating all these fights. And what they were doing was they were looking for fighters to be alternates for that tournament. So they would just grab groups of people and fly them to a location, put together the fights, film them all, and then they would kind of pick and choose who they felt like putting in there. So at my show where I fought, it was me and Rick. We fought each other, obviously. My brother Matt fought one of Rick's buddies. Brian Dunn fought somebody from another group. Yasunori Matsumoto fought. Scott Ferozzo wasn't there. He was at another event that they did some other time in another location.
So that's what I'm referring to. Okay.
Yeah, that's the event that I think you've seen. Because so after the fight, they took us all back to one of the homes of one of the guys that were doing this, and they showed us some of the videos of some of the other fights. And I think I remember seeing, I think I saw Scott Ferozzo's fight. I saw another fight by a Muay Thai guy. I can't remember his last name, but his first name was Kevin something. And he stood out because he beat the dog shit out of some guy. But yeah, they were all just like just little backyard fights that they would fly people in, collect everybody, pair off the fights, let people fight, and filmed it all. And I don't know that anybody actually ended up going into an alternate spot for the Mars show, but that's what I later found out we were told they were doing. Maybe they just wanted to fly people in and watch people fight. That's very possible too.
That's wild. That's wild.
Yeah, they did it, from what I understand, they did it 5 or 6 times. So yeah, Ferozzo's had one location. I'm sure he had half a dozen fights, at that event. And then the event I was at, and there's a few others I was told.
So you win by armbar, 154. What was your impression of Matsumoto? Was he's kind of one of those names that flies under the radar on most diehard MMA?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know who he was then. I mean, the sport was so new. I didn't know anybody. Like I said, I thought I was going to fight for the rich people's entertainment and then get assassinated and left in a ditch. So yeah, I didn't know who he was. I won my fight. I was super happy. I remember watching his fight. He fought, if I remember correctly, a really big muscular. No, that I take that back. That was a different fight. He fought a big fat guy, if I remember correctly. And he ended up winning because the guy fought with a tank top, and he ended up wrapping the tank top around his neck and choking him.
Oh wow!
I might be getting that mixed up with somebody else, but I'm pretty sure that was it.
It was like a Jared Bolander move with Ferozzo.
Yep.
So Jesse Jones.
About Matsumoto, I don't know if I'm going to ask you if he was there. An original Matsumoto student that later joined Miletich and had his own run is Dave Strasser. Was Strasser with him?
No. Well, I don't think so. I wasn't training with Pat at the time, so I wouldn't have known who Dave was. But yeah, no, I don't think he did.
Just checking. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So Jesse Jones
that doesn't surprise me though now.
He just a foot, Mike. I'm sorry, but just a footnote on Matsumoto. It's interesting and one of those things that's a little bit sad. He's known for that hardcore style. Dave actually went to his retirement about a year ago, and he said he's in bad shape. Like he has a hard time putting pants on in terms of bending over and things like that. But he fought hardcore even in training till into his 60s, kind of thing. That
doesn't surprise me. He was hard as nails.
All right, let's go back to Jeremy. Jesse Jones.
Yes.
He's one of your early training partners. He ended his career at 15-5. He's one of those guys that's kind of surprising that never made a UFC debut. Yeah. What was it like training with him?
He was incredibly talented. He was younger than the rest of us. I think I was, early 20s. I think he was maybe 19 or 20, so a little bit younger than us. But he had a decent Taekwondo background, and he was incredibly explosive and athletic. But he had, for all his talent, he struggled mentally to have confidence in his ability. He was really good. Nuts. But yeah, it's always crazy, man. The guys that seem to have the most talent are the ones that have the least confidence. Yeah, so he had a couple of fights, and he had a couple of really good wins. And then he had a fight. He fought Shonie Carter on one of the shows locally in Omaha, and Shonie broke him mentally. Like Jesse was beating him up, would stand up and knock him around. Shonie would take him down and then get up and like wave him up, like kind of mocking him. And Jesse just got so frustrated that he eventually tapped, just sitting on the mat.
Ooh.
Good. Yeah, Shonie just Shonie's a good fighter. and he's good at playing head games, but he just, Jesse just couldn't handle the pressure.
Jesse Jones submitted Kaz Daniels, Henry Matamoros, and Dave Manet.
Yeah.
So everybody home.
Absolutely. Yeah. He was incredibly talented.
That's amazing to me. So you look at the guy's record. He went to a decision with Lusal. Lusal goes to the UFC.
Yep.
I was shocked that he never at least made an appearance, through the octagon walls.
Yep. And I think he could have, certainly back in that day, he was good enough to have done it. But if I remember correctly, the fight with David Loazo too, like Loazo kind of played some head games and Jesse didn't fight well because of it. And yeah, Jesse was absolutely, he's absolutely there, good enough to fight in the UFC.
Like, did you keep in touch with him? And then I always thought it was like you moved to Iowa and he stayed in Omaha, and that was kind of like where it didn't work out for him. But
so I'm not sure how to. I don't want to overstate this, but it seems like generally when I am at a gym, there is some cohesiveness and focus, and then when I leave, it kind of fizzles out. So yeah, when I was in Iowa, it was me, my brother, Jesse, Brian Dunn. We had a handful of other guys, Scott Morton, Jesse, Shane Swaney. We had a handful of guys. We're all good and we're all focused and doing well. When I moved to Iowa, they all kind of splintered and kind of went their own ways. And some of them stayed training, some of them didn't. Some of them stayed connected to the sport, some didn't.
Jeremy, let me further your statement to kind of help clarify it. My belief, having never walked into a gym that you were even present at, is that you take such a large role at the gym in regards to like duties and responsibilities that when you leave, it's a void that's very difficult to fill. And sometimes people just don't understand how many plates you had spinning at the same time.
I guess, I don't, it's kind of hard to agree with that without sounding arrogant, but I guess maybe that's
my I can honestly say of all the fighters I know, like you're going to be in the top percentage, 5%, the top of total dedication to this. You know what I mean? And I think that's really what shows. Other people, like, hey, they like to go out, they like to get their picture taken, they like to do blogs, they like to do, Jeremy's pretty much a gym person, and he always has been a good training partner.
I want to train, I want to teach. That's really all I
would say a fiend, like an addict is with drugs, Jeremy is with the gym.
Yeah.
We agree on that at least?
Yeah. I like this part. I don't like the fanfare. I don't like the spotlight. I like the training and the fighting and the teaching.
Hey, while we're on here, did you mention Scott Morton?
Yeah.
So, that was one of those highlight reel losses in the UFC, and he was like a friend of yours, a training partner of yours.
Yeah.
How did you guys register that loss? Because he's the guy that got smashed by Pat Smith at UFC.
No, that was Scott Morris.
Oh, okay.
Scott Morton was actually one of my students early on. He now, if I remember correctly, he runs his own gym now, and he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and he's quite good. But yeah, he was. I think he started training with us when he was 16 or 17, maybe early.
Sorry about confusion. You didn't know Scott Morris then.
I met him a few times. He was part of that same organization, but he was from another branch.
Okay. So. But when that loss went down, how did that go down in the Midwest and stuff like that?
Yeah, we were a little bit upset about that because when he got chosen to go to represent us, I wanted to go as well. Like that I wanted that to be me. And so he got picked over me, and who knows what had happened. I was still pretty raw and young then. I don't know that I would have done any better, but of course you always look back and I could have won that fight. You always armchair quarterback everything.
Okay. Let's talk about your first tournament. It's May 11th, 1996, the Quad Cities Ultimate, something that later became Extreme Challenge.
Yeah.
Rick Adsit and Mark Hanssen are your opponents.
Yep.
Please bring us through it.
So I had Monte contacted us somehow. I think back in the day, man, some of this stuff it doesn't register. I don't know how we got in contact with him, but I was in Omaha. He did a fight in the Quad Cities. It's only about 4 hours away. He goes, "Hey, we're gonna do this fight. Are you interested in trying it out?" So I said yes. I joined the heavyweight tournament. Monte originally had a background in boxing. So he kind of based a lot of his initial stuff off of boxing because we didn't really have a frame of reference, right? So if I remember correctly, boxing over 190 is heavyweight or maybe cruiserweight. I mean, that's
Cruiserweight.
the weight, cruiserweight. So Monte decided, okay, we're going to follow boxing weight classes. 190 and up is heavyweight. I weighed 195. I didn't understand anything about cutting weight. I weighed 195. The cutoff's 190. I guess that makes me a heavyweight.
And
then
Mark
my opponent
Hanssen's probably 295.
295. Yeah, 285. Yeah, huge and skilled. So I fought Mike Adsit in my first round.
Is it Rick or Mike?
Mike. I fought
Mike.
Yep, I fought Rick in my first fight, Rick Graveson, who we actually became really good friends later. We trained together at Pat's for many years. So I fight, and Rick actually fought on that same card. He fought, kind of a funny story. So we show up at the hotel, and I had just fought Rick a few months before that on the Atlanta fights. And I run into Rick walking out of the hotel, and he's like, "Oh, hey, are you here?" I was like, "Yeah, good to see you." He goes, "Are you fighting?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm fighting. I'm in the heavyweight." He was like, "Oh, thank God." Like, because he was fighting in the middleweight or lightweight or whatever they called it in the under 190 tournament. So he was worried that I was going to be fighting in the same division as him.
That's cool.
So anyway, so I end up fighting Mike Adsit in the first round, and I win. But he, I ended up triangling, I think. Yeah. And then I fought Hanssen in the finals, and that's when I realized that giving up 100 pounds to a skilled fighter is a big problem.
So Mark Hanssen, a future training partner with you, is this what planted the seed to move to Iowa?
Yep, absolutely. So Pat Miletich was the main event, and he fought Matsumoto on that card. And Hanssen was
a rematch.
Yeah, that was their second fight. And so Mark Hanssen won the tournament, obviously. And then, we started chatting a bit, and I realized that these were guys that were training with more of a focus and a purpose than I was. Because at the time, me and my buddies were just kind of floundering around, figuring out what we could do. We would just get together and just beat the shit out of each other, which was actually one of the benefits for me in the early days of fighting, because I wasn't super skilled, but I was tough as shit. Like, I was no stranger to getting beat up. So, a lot of people, like your typical Taekwondo guy or karate guy or judo guy, like they're used to competition and maybe hard competition in their style, but they're not used to getting fucked up. I was used to getting beat up pretty bad. So getting worked over in a fight didn't really faze me. I could stay focused and keep working through that, even if I was getting my ass kicked. And that was a rare commodity back then. But I knew that, like, these guys had way more focus on training intelligently and training with a purpose. So I started I started making trips out there, like once or twice a month. I'd go out there for a weekend and stay with them and train with them. And then, eventually I moved out there.
Okay. So
wait, hold on. So in the Lions Den, they called it jumping a guy in, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
So you show up at Miletich's, and those guys are, wrestler athletes, and you're still a young kid, without your shirt on, you don't look like much yet. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You know what I mean. I'm being nice.
Yes.
I say that with respect, but like, they probably tried to beat the shit out of you when you showed up. Like, how'd that first day go, or how,
So it wasn't that bad. There was no malice to it, but they trained hard. So it's not like, hey, here's a new guy, we're gonna fuck him up. It was, hey, here's another body. We train hard. We fuck each other up all the time. Welcome to the club. So yeah, I got worked over quite a bit, but there was no malice to it or no new guy hazing to it, because they did the same thing to each other. They just trained hard, and that's kind of what I wanted. So, I definitely took my lumps, but that's kind of what shaped me to be who I am. So,
do you think that type of attitude continued on and carried over? Because some of the training sessions at MFS are legendary in regards to the regional scene in regards to some of the savage beatings that taken place.
Yeah, absolutely. And it maybe got a little excessive. It got worse after I moved to Utah. But yeah, so that's the thing. Like, back in the day, around those times. I think Pat and Mark were really the only ones that had much experience in jiu-jitsu. I believe that Pat had gone to a Renzo Gracie seminar and he had a videotape set, and that was pretty much the extent of our knowledge. And Pat and Mark would just drill those techniques, and it was just fundamental stuff like what is the guard, how to pass the guard, what is the mount, what do you do when you're mounted on somebody, just real basic stuff. But they trained it hard. And again, being a Midwest Iowa wrestler mentality, that's all it was. It was work hard, push hard, drive towards good technique. Pat had a extensive kickboxing background as well as a wrestling background, and then I think he and Mark were both blue belts in jiu-jitsu. So,
and the funny, we interviewed Pat. We did a deep dive with Pat. The one thing that we never really got to is he and Hanssen, Mark Hanssen, who another early architect of the MFS, they fought twice as children.
Fought each other?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I uncovered that on like some sort of Davenport message board in regards, I was at the fight in like 6th grade. Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me because they both have that same mentality.
Yeah. And they've got big reputations as well. Both.
Yeah.
So I just want to give a little bit of props to Hanssen, because this is a dude that, this is an early Brock Lesnar type of guy, because you can find guys 280 like the UFC did. Remember Thomas Ramirez, Julian Sanchez? Remember guys like that? This guy's an athlete. Why don't you tell, how does he compare to Brock Lesnar, like in your eyes?
Obviously Lesnar was much more of a high level wrestler, but Hanssen was obviously he wasn't quite as fit. He was a little bit softer than Brock, but yeah. I mean, he weighed 280, and if he was shredded, he probably would have been 255. So yeah, he's a very high level athlete. He was a very cerebral fighter as well. Polished stand up, good wrestling, good jiu-jitsu, not just a big knucklehead thug. I'm going to overpower you because I'm 280. He fought with good technique and a good, strong mindset. So yeah, very, very much so. Obviously not the level of wrestler that Brock was, but
usually guys that size.
Say again.
Miguel?
I'm sorry. Hanssen went on to be a cop, right? That's why he didn't.
He was a cop all along. Yeah.
Yeah, they made him quit. But usually guys that size, they tend to rely on how big they are rather than fight. And it's a very rare occasion you get a Brock Lesnar or a Mark Hanssen. They want to show you the potential that their body has.
So funny thing you mentioned about that, I fought Mark in the finals, and the ref says, go, we clash. I duck and grab a body lock. He jumps to guard on me and tries to put me in a guillotine. He's 100 pounds heavier than me, and he jumps to guard. So yeah, he was very technically sound and very technically driven. He was not a big dumb ogre that fought with power. He had power, but he fought with intelligence.
So you went 9 minutes and 10 seconds with him.
Yep. Most of it him mounted on me, caving my head in.
Yeah, pulling guard probably meant he wasn't overly concerned yet.
Well, maybe again, you never know what was going on back in those days because we were all brand new. Like, at least I thought every time I stepped into the ring, I was potentially going to die. I didn't know what the hell was going on. It was a crazy world, but so he jumps to guard, maybe because he thought he had a guillotine, so he thought he would just finish it early. But again, we were all under the impression that, fighting was new. This is jiu-jitsu. I'm going to put you in a guillotine. I'm going to end this quick. Maybe that's what he was thinking. But so I ended up getting out of the guillotine. I spent a little bit of time on top of his guard, punched him, not very successfully. He eventually gets up and takes me down a couple of minutes in, I think. I don't remember exactly. But yeah, then it goes bad. I had him in the guard for a little bit. He passed my guard because he knew how. I didn't. And then he gets mounted on me. And then back then, grabbing the cage was legal. And we fought in a square cage.
Was this the dog kennel?
Yeah. So
essentially, Monte got a giant dog kennel and had it welded on top of a boxing ring.
Yep, he had it made, yeah. But yeah, it was a 20 by 20, just square cornered cage. Mark puts my head right in the corner and he's just beating the shit out of me. Every time I tried to do anything, he just reach up and grab the cage because it was legal. I couldn't get him off. So,
Jesus.
I think that fight's on my YouTube channel if you guys want to watch it. So is my fight.
Who's reffing in those days?
It was a guy from Chicago. I can't remember his name, but he trained out of a fairly reputable gym, I believe. I don't want to throw any names out there because I'm not entirely certain who.
Was it Rob Hines?
No, it was a Hispanic guy. I want to say Ramirez was his name, but I'm not certain. But he trained out of a gym in Chicago.
Was it Roberto Ramirez?
That might have been it. Yeah, that might be it.
Okay, because at this time he was going to all the UFCs. Yeah, the guy was at the Dance in Detroit. I mean, that's how old school. He's still Chicago Fight Team gym owner Roberto Ramirez. That would actually make sense.
Yeah, that's familiar.
Have you ever looked at an opponent and just saw them and just said, you know what? You're already spending your win money and you're driving home before the fight even takes place?
Yeah.
So that is what your next opponent thought when he saw you. That was Gary Myers. And when we interviewed Gary for our deep dive with him, it haunts him still. He's just like, because he really put it on you.
Yeah.
And your biggest strength and asset is your ability to take punishment and stay calm under lots of heavy pressure.
Yeah.
You certainly showed that in this fight.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things I did best. Like I said, like I had an advantage over most of the people in the early days of the sport because I was no stranger to getting my ass kicked. That like people underestimate that. Like I grew up with two older brothers that beat me mercilessly, typical older brother shit when I was growing up. So yeah, I mean, the first time I got punched in the face was not when I had my first fight. It was when I was probably 6 years old by my 10-year-old brother. Right. So I was no stranger to getting beat up, So yeah, when Gary rushed across the ring and grabbed me and threw me on my head, I was like, yeah, okay, here we go again. I guess I have to deal with this until I find a way to beat you.
That fight haunts him. Like it haunts him. Like you can tell it. And he's a competitor. He's
sure. Absolutely.
He's an alpha. Those things are supposed to haunt you.
Yep.
It's funny. Monte tells the story. He's setting up the fight and he sees you somewhere, a video or something, and he's like, that kid, he's not. There's no way. I guarantee you, he can't beat me. You talk smack to Monte, and I think that's why it sticks with Gary because he opened his
big mouth. Like, hey, Monte saw me fight. He saw me fight a couple of times. He's like, I wouldn't be quite so confident. You sure about that?
Yeah, that's good though. You know what I mean? That's sure. Good. It's good.
Well, it's important. You have to go into every fight thinking that you're unbreakable, you're unbeatable.
A championship mindset.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, which is a fancy way of saying completely delusional sometimes.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what that is. May 10th, 1997, you jump into another four-man tournament. You have Stephen Goss and Jason Godsey, another integrated fighting legend. You're fighting tough guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was your experience with Jason Godsey?
He was good. He was a fair bit bigger than me. I was a little bit smaller then. We had a rematch in the UFC later, and I was a little bit bigger. But I still, for the majority of my career, I was, between 190 and 215. That's always kind of where I was for the majority of my fights. And again, that was a heavyweight tournament, and Godsey was like 230, 235 or so. And he was good, and he was an odd character because he's one of those guys that had he had good technique, but he just had that intangible quality where he would do things and he could get away with things that you didn't expect, an odd level of strength, an odd level of flexibility, an odd level of balance and mobility, whatever. And he had bits of all of those. So yeah, he was able to get on top of me and I remember he just kept putting his forearm in my throat, which by today's standards is laughable. But back then I didn't know how to deal with it and I couldn't figure out how to get away from it. I ended up panicking and turning my back and he choked me. So.
Yeah, you went 642 with Godsey. I think he's a high school teacher today. One of the more
science teacher.
Yeah, one of the more cerebral fighters.
Yeah,
I had also been told from people that had fought him that he's got bad habits that you wouldn't expect him to have, but he's athletic enough to get away with them.
Yep, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Dan Severn, June 25th, 1997, Extreme Challenge 7. Monte obviously has made the change from Quad Cities Ultimate to Extreme Challenge. He's now starting to take that show on the road as well. Obviously, incredibly advanced in regards to his forethought of mixed martial arts.
Yeah.
How does Dan Severn come together, and what are your thoughts about the fight?
Well, so back then, I mean, the sport was still relatively new. I think Severn had fought in the UFC a couple of times. I think it might have been after he had won one of them. I don't know. I know he won one tournament, and then he won the Ultimate as well, like the Tournament of Champions they did. And I'm not sure which one it was after, but the UFC didn't hold people to hard contracts. So Monte called Dan and goes, "Hey, I'm doing this fight. Do you want to fight?" Dan's a competitor, and he's like, "Sure, I'll go fight." Just how it is. So same thing here. I was like, "I'll fight." Yeah, it's in my hometown, so I'm ready to fight. As far as the fight itself goes, Monte was actually one of the first back in the day to recognize that we need some rules and we need some structure to this. We can't just have no time limit matches, with no rules. So Monte actually in the Quad City Ultimate, we were required to wear gloves. He had time limits, even though I don't know that any of the fights went the distance, but he did have time limits, or rounds, I mean. And he did the same thing in this fight where he said, "Look, we don't know well enough how to judge a fight. So if this fight goes the distance, it's a draw. We're not going to have judges." So, Dan and I fought for, I think, 15 minutes, maybe 20. I can't remember.
Did it surprise you that Dan's career kind of turned out to be just a little left of center in certain instances, like him and Brad Kohler and Shannon Rich?
No, not really. Because Dan was always, Dan always struck me as somebody that, like, despite the fact that he was a strong competitor and a good wrestler and a committed athlete, he also was a smart man that's trying to make a living. So I know even late into his career, he would take fights like, I know I'm Dan Severn. You got some local guy that you think is going to make a name off beating me up. Sure, I'll come beat him up. He just a little bit of both. So I think he walked that line well where, he was a world champion legitimately. He was a talented fighter legitimately. But also, if you want to throw him some money to go, do some local fight against a local guy, he'll do that too. And I think he just separated the two in his head. Like, look, this is a real fight. This is something I need to take seriously. This is something I do to make a little bit of money to feed my family.
Yeah. He and Travis Fulton kind of walked that same line at certain times for sure.
Yep.
There was a guy that had a real big reputation out of California at the time, named Chris Brennan, that was always looking for big fights. And August 30th, 1997, you helped train Pat Miletich to fight him.
Yeah.
What was the temperature like going into that bout as a corner?
So, as a corner, it was nothing different than every other fight. Pat always trained incredibly hard. He was in great shape. And still back then in the day, at least for me, this, everything is always my perspective. I don't know what everybody else thought, but I felt like we had some kind of secret. Like, we're training in Iowa, we're in good shape, and we know jujitsu. Like, we didn't bother to think that anybody else in the world knew jujitsu, and if they did, it wasn't as good as ours. And if they did, they weren't in as good a shape as us. And they, so it's just, we still thought we were invincible. We're going to go in there and beat everybody. But yeah, we knew this, Brennan was a talented fighter, talented jiu-jitsu guy, but Pat is more well-rounded, better striker, better wrestler, and as good at jiu-jitsu. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what we felt. We're like, yeah, this is what we're running with, and obviously it proved true because he was able to out-wrestle him and, so.
Yeah, Brennan, we had him on and he was just like, man, it was amazing. I fought one of the best guys in the world in his hometown, and I had that opportunity. He's like, I couldn't have been happier. I felt it was a draw. Going into this fight, Pat was 16-1. His only loss was to Matt Hume. Somewhat controversial, stopped on a cut, which was really a no-issue thing. Yeah. Chris was 4-0. Chris says he acquiesces and said he definitely, had there been judges, he would have lost that bout, rightfully so. But those two just continue running into each other. Pat's next bout, like a month later, November 15th, Chris Brennan again at the Extreme Challenge Trials.
Yep.
Wins a split decision there. I thought it should have been unanimous. And runs into him at UFC 16 as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, during a tournament. In between then, though, you fight another Extreme Challenge 15, a four-man tournament, Pat Ass alone and Noe Hernandez.
Yes.
Hernandez with an extensive boxing background. You know, somebody there was a lot of upside. A lot of people had thought that he was the next big thing.
Yeah, that guy was a fucking destroyer. When he punched people, they just disintegrated.
And John Peretti was in the audience, I believe, scouting.
That was actually the fight that got me into the UFC, and Noe as well. So in that fight, Pat Asloan was a decent grappler. I fought him in the first round, and I mean, it was a good fight. I ended up, I think I arm locked him. But I mean, you know, he went after my legs a couple of times. It was a back and forth fight. It was decent. Noe's first fight, he actually fought a guy named Rainy Martinez. And Rainy Martinez.
Don Fry student.
Yep, I was gonna say, yep, trained with Don Fry. Noe hit him with such a hard right hand. The whole fight was over in like 8 or 9 seconds. Hit him with a right hand that cut him like across his eyebrow, under his eye, and back this way across his face, like split his whole face open. Rainey was, from what I was told, Rainey was blind in that eye for like 7 hours after that fight. Noe was a fucking destroyer. You did not want to get hit by him. It was like he was throwing sledgehammers at you.
He also was like one of those not you're not likely to see him smiling. Like he was like one of those real serious, like hardcore dudes.
Yep. And that, I think, I mean, that was his personality, but I think he also felt like that was required because he kind of came from a boxing background. And in the boxing world, you're not friendly with your opponents. You hate
not at all.
Before and after the fight, like, don't be my friend. I don't want to talk to you. We're not buddies. You know, and in MMA, it's a little looser than that. You know, a lot of times after you fight people, you go train with them and that kind of thing. And Noe was having none of that. Like Monte would put us in 2 locker rooms, you know, red corner, blue corner locker rooms. And Noe was like, no, I'm not going to that locker room with them. I'll find my own section alone with my team. I'm not sharing a locker room with anybody, you know? So, yeah.
So Noe, his next bout is Chuck Liddell. I mean, that's how impressed John Peretti was with him. And were you kind of surprised at that?
No. So actually he fought Chuck because I was actually supposed to fight Chuck on that card. That's the card when I fought Frank Shamrock.
Okay, right.
So I was originally going to fight Chuck, you know, as an alternate for the tournament with Dan Henderson, Alan Goez, Carlos Newton, and Bob Gilstrap. Yep. So I was supposed to fight as an alternate against Chuck in that fight. And then at the last minute, they decided that they wanted to do the whole Night of Champions thing. We talked about that last time I was on, didn't we?
Yeah.
So
you got pulled to do the fight. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got pulled out of the fight with Chuck to fight Frank on that show. And so they decided to pull Noe in to fight Chuck because that's the fight that John had just seen. So
that's May 15th, 1998, UFC 17. And I think Noe Hernandez, man, like it's just one of those forgotten names, like you had described. Just a heck of a puncher. And what an how did that fight go between you? Because I know you won by decision.
Yeah, I won by decision because I was able to take him down and control him. It wasn't a super dominant win. Like, I mean, his takedown defense wasn't great, and I was 1,000% focused on taking him down. So I was not going to stand up with him at all. But so I mean, I was able to take him down and control position a bit and came close to a couple of submissions. Nothing spectacular, but I mean, you know, not a great performance because you know, trying to control him and he was dangerous. So I remember at one point I was in his guard and I just, you know, my head on his chest and he hit me like this. And I could have sworn that somebody was standing up next to me, kicking me.
Really?
Dude, he hit so hard. Ridiculous power.
Holy cow. Was UFC 16 the 4-man tournament Pat Miletich fought in? It was supposed to crown the first 170-pound champion. Was that your first UFC that you had ever attended?
Possibly. I'd have to double check. I don't really remember the numbers and names. The first one was with when he fought Mikey Burnett, Townsend Saunders. That tournament, is that the one you talked about?
That's it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that was it. Yeah.
Okay. So you go from February 27th in front of John Peretti A few weeks later, March 13th, you've seen him again, getting a little FaceTime. That's super important. Miletich beats Townsend Saunders, who is an absolute savage by split decision.
Yeah.
Shoulder chokes Chris Brennan. Mikey Burnett hurts his hand. There's no finals, so it gets pushed to a future event.
Yeah.
The main event, Frank Shamrock, Igor Zinoviev. Did you interact with Zinoviev at all?
Not at that point, but he actually, him and John Lewis came to Omaha and did a seminar for me, or rather a seminar at a gym where I was at, and I got to meet him a little bit then. He's a really nice guy.
Zinoviev was?
Yeah. Very quiet, but yeah, nice guy.
Future Jeffrey Epstein bodyguard, I might add, Igor Zinoviev.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he used to like be his driver in Florida.
Huh.
It's interesting where people wind up in life.
Yeah.
UFC 17, Frank Shamrock, you make your UFC debut and they immediately put you into a world title fight. Is that a little hard to adjust to?
No, not really. I think for me, it was actually easier because like I knew that I was being pulled in. Like I knew the structure of the show. They were getting ready to do this Night of Champions thing where they were just going to do a pay-per-view event and they were just going to show a bunch of old title fights. And I knew that they wanted one new one. They wanted one new fight to entice people to actually buy the event. Nobody's going to buy a pay-per-view of reruns. So I kind of knew that they were setting me up as a sacrificial lamb. So my expectations were very low. I knew nobody thought I was going to win. Nobody cared. And not only that, but he had just fought Kevin Jackson and Igor Zinoviev and beat them both in like 30 seconds. And I knew that there's nobody going to beat me in 30 seconds. So like, I mean, the pressure was really low for me because I'm like, they don't expect me to win. I know I can last longer than those guys, and those guys are world champions. So like, whatever, let's go see what it goes. So, I mean, no, there really wasn't a ton of pressure for me. Kind of weird, but yeah.
You know, in that fight, you had mentioned that Pat had to, well, I mean, you hear Pat in the corner yelling at you, like, take the fight, it's your turn, it's your turn. Was there some mental adjustment, at least, during the bout?
Absolutely, because I'm fighting Frank Shamrock, right? This guy's destroyer of worlds. He just beat Kevin Jackson, Igor Zinoviev in 30 seconds. So the fight starts, he throws a kick, I grab his leg, I scoop him up and dump him on his head. And then I jump inside to him like, okay, that was a little bit of luck. He didn't expect it. This is Frank Shamrock. Any minute, he's going to turn it on and he's going to beat me, right? And then I slide to the mount, and I'm like, okay, he didn't see that coming. He's letting me do it. This is Frank Shamrock. Any minute, he's going to turn it on and I'm going to lose. Fast forward 15 minutes, and I'm still going, okay, any minute, he's going to turn it on and I'm going to lose somehow. And I could never get in gear and convince myself, no, I am better than this guy. I can beat him. It's not luck. It's not chance. He's not slipping. I'm better than him. And I could never get in gear mentally and convince myself that I can beat him. Even after winning the entire fight, I just was still like, man, I'm just getting lucky over and over and over. He's not paying attention. He's dropping the ball. He's letting me do it. I just kept making excuses for why I was doing so well because I just couldn't convince myself that I was better than him.
That's wild. Like that's shocking to us to hear something like that. There's a legendary promoter in the regional Iowa scene, Chad Mason.
Oh yeah.
At one point, there was a famous picture taken of you choking him out.
Yep.
What precipitated that?
So Chad and I were real good friends for a long time. I actually was a bit of a catalyst for him coming into the promoting scene. We trained together for quite a while. Actually, if I remember correctly, he was one of the people that introduced me to John Lewis. He had been out to Vegas and trained with him some and knew him. And I don't remember exactly the details, but he might have had a hand in helping bring that seminar there. But Chad was just a great talker, and he could basically talk anybody into anything. And so obviously he excelled at promoting fights. He was one of the first ones to do kind of the the weekly bar fight thing where just locals can come up and give it a try.
It's Toad Holler fights.
Yep. The problem is, again, back in the day, the sport was really new and everybody was infatuated with it. So there was a lot of money to be made. And Chad kind of leaned into the dark side a little bit and started taking advantage of people and not being great with his finances, and just, kind of went off the deep end a little bit, kind of burned a lot of bridges, burned a lot of people. He has since corrected course and is back on track. I spoke to him just a couple of weeks ago now. And he is actually, he's a nurse, he's a registered nurse, and he's in the Ukraine helping the war effort over there. Yeah.
Really?
Like completely turned his life around, straightened everything out, and is back on track and doing good things.
And sometimes people hit stumbling blocks.
Yep.
What are you going to do?
I mean, that's the thing, man. When you're a young kid in the middle of this hurricane of MMA and you're making $10,000 a month cash doing fights, it's pretty hard to not get drawn into that, and start pushing a little bit more. So
no, for sure.
Mistakes but yeah, I mean, he's corrected everything now as far as I know, and he's doing well.
Well, good for him.
Yeah.
What was it like going to Brazil and fighting Ebenezer Braga at UFC 17 and a half?
It was terrifying. Brazil is obviously the mecca of fighting. So, we were all pretty pumped to go to Brazil. It was in Sao Paulo, which is not Rio, not the resort city. It's the big, dirty, scary industrial complex city. They pick us up at the airport, and on the bus ride to the hotel, we had to stop and wait for a homeless guy that decided to drop his pants and take a piss right in the middle of the street. And the bus just had to stop and wait for him. Yeah.
They didn't have to, but they did. They chose to.
Yeah. Well, because he was like, I'm not moving. I'm taking a piss here. You're just going to wait for me. So, yeah, it was terrifying. I just hid in my hotel the whole time until they took us to the fight. Braga was an incredibly challenging opponent. That was, yeah. He was.
Well, some would argue he was top 3 in the world at this time.
Yeah, I could see that. He had beat a lot of tough guys. Like, there was, for me, it seemed like, this is going to sound really bad, but it seemed to me like what we were doing in the U.S. was like little kids playing with their father's toys, pretending to be fighters. Down in Brazil, they're doing it for real.
Yeah.
Down in Brazil, they're doing head kicks and stomps, and I mean, they're fucking each other up. Those guys are fighting. We're pretending to fight. And so when I went down there, that's kind of how it felt. Like, I'm fighting this guy that is a fighter.
Yeah, but you're about as serious and advanced a student of this game as the States had at that time.
Yeah, and I'm like,
and you ran into just a hard man.
Yeah, and that's really what it was. I mean, he was a talented fighter, but I don't know that he was much more skilled than I was, but he was harder than I was, and he was more committed to winning a fight than I was, and I could tell right away.
It was almost like,
yeah,
some people were fighting for sport. Braga was like fighting to save his family.
Exactly, and that bled into the fight. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah, very much.
You watch those early Braga fights, especially him with Kevin Randleman.
Yep.
And Brandon Lee Hinkle. It's just, that's a guy fighting for his life. Yeah, not for sport. Yeah, it's different.
Well, so I don't know how many people know this, probably maybe none, but I was originally scheduled to fight Vanderlei Silva on that card.
Really?
Yeah. They changed it, I don't know how far out, a month or whatever, and they had Vanderlei fight Belfort instead. And so I ended up fighting Braga, but I was originally scheduled to fight Vanderlei Silva.
Okay, so
it's pretty much the same, more or less the same thing. It was going to be a rough,
Yeah. I mean, I'm saying those guys are like you said, those guys are fighting to survive, and up in America, we're fighting because it's fun to fight.
Right. You brought up Wanderlei Silva. He fought Vitor Belfort. At this time, I'm sitting behind a freaking computer. I don't want to sound disrespectful, but at this time, Vitor Belfort was going through a lot of mental issues in regards to confidence. At least that was the rumor behind the scenes.
Sure.
Did Pat have to go into the locker room and give Vitor Belfort a pep talk prior to Wanderlei?
Honestly, maybe, I don't know. I didn't see it. I don't know if it happened. It's possible.
That's the rumor.
Yeah.
And people that are kind of questioning, it's Vitor Belfort, no way. Look at his fight with Joe Charles. It's an obvious work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a confidence builder for him.
Struggled with confidence issues.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, on that same card, Pat Miletich, your coach, brings home the belt against Mikey Burnett. Kind of a lackluster performance on both of their sides.
Yeah.
Pat took a lot of criticism at this point due to that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they kind of nullified each other. I think Mikey Burnett was maybe a little bit stronger, a little bit more powerful, maybe a little bit better wrestling. Pat had a little more polish in his kickboxing and was better on the ground. But really what it boiled down to is their wrestling kind of nullified each other, and neither one of them was really willing to take a big risk and step outside and do something drastic. That fight was mostly a little bit of boxing with a lot of clinch work, but yeah, neither one of them really wanted to take a big risk. So it ended up being, kind of a boring fight.
After that bout, Pat calls out Romina Sato, who one of Miguel's top 5 favorites of all time.
Yeah, Sato.
And it's almost as if the UFC, they're putting pressure on him to either retire and hang it up. But if you look at Pat's performances after he loses to Newton, they're his best performances of his career, but he's walking around almost mangled. Like you can see he's got like his gait when he walks is off because he's obviously dealing with some issues, but he's finishing guys and super exciting.
Yeah. Well, so I don't know if Pat told you guys this, but when he was little, he broke his back when he was sledding. Like little kids set up a ramp in the snow and went off a huge jump, and he landed so hard that he broke his back. So yeah, that's why he walks that way. He's had problems with his back and his neck his entire life. So he's always kind of got that hunched over, that that posture. Yeah, he broke his back. So yeah, he always dealt with that. For the most part, it didn't bother him, but certainly when you get warmed up and loosened up for a fight, it shows less. But yeah, when you're just walking around,
But Pat at this point though was really starting to suck wind at the weigh-ins.
Yeah, as you get a little older, it gets harder and harder to cut weight. Yeah.
So do you think that affected him at the end?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I would say that was 100% what it was, because he trained just as hard. He was just as focused on everything else. But as you get a little older, your body is not as willing to put up with that, and it hurts more and it takes longer, and that's just how it goes.
Man, the mark that Pat Miletich has left on the mixed martial arts world will never be matched.
Yeah.
I mean, that guy is. I mean, he's one of the Mount Rushmore, in my opinion.
I agree. And a lot of people, as the sport progresses, everybody always wants to compare, modern day athletes to old athletes, but nobody thinks that, the 1950s football players could come and win the Super Bowl now, right? But you have to compare them for what it was back in the day, right? When nobody really knew what was going on, everybody was kind of stumbling through the dark, trying to find their way. And Pat was able to do what he did. Yeah, that absolutely deserves recognition. And that's something that will never be surpassed, because now everybody can look at what we did back then and use it as a foundational guide to how to move forward.
And let us not forget, like Pat in our interview with him said, at this point in time, he had a letter in his sock drawer with a gun. And essentially he said, if I didn't win the UFC championship, I was going to kill myself.
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean,
think about that. And like, you could say whatever it is you want about Pat Miletich's political views. Guy's not a bullshitter when it comes to stuff like that.
Yeah.
Wow. Miguel, he fights for you at hook and shoot against Jerome Smith.
Yes.
This is a great fight.
Elaborate on that before I move on, Miguel?
What do you want to know? Jerome Smith once stole Dave Monet's car.
No kidding.
Yeah. So Jerome Smith was also Frank Mir's debut for me. So he's a big military kid. used to train with John Rankin, 230 strong, and he wanted to fight. Horn showed up at the show, took the fight, and this guy was much bigger and stuff like that. That fight was made day before the show. I think it may have even actually been the day of the show.
That's how a lot of it went back then.
And the funny one of the things I remember of that is Horn got popped because he was walking around with a spoon, like keeping the swelling down on his face after the fight, happy as shit, smiling, but with holding a spoon to his face because he got popped one, and he taught Jerome a little thing about technique that Jerome still remembers, I think.
So it's funny, I still tell people about that fight because you're right. So you guys are familiar with jiu-jitsu, right? And it's kind of like the stereotypical jiu-jitsu thing is I'm going to grab a clinch, I'm going to slide to your back. If you decide to grab me in a headlock, it's no big deal because I can deal with that, right? You guys kind of know the self-defense mantra, right? And so I tell people this all the time. So I'm, when I run a program for cops and we work them through this, and I tell people, like, look, when you slide to the back, just tuck your head down a little bit. The guy might grab you and try to give you a little noogie and hit you a little bit. Not going to be a big deal. Except for this one time, I had a fight where a guy landed one punch on me, and it was the fight with Smith. He grabbed me in a headlock, cracked me one time, one punch, and then I take him down, mount him, and finish him. And that one punch swelled my eye completely shut instantly. Like literally like this. Grabbed me in a headlock, one punch, eye swelled completely shut.
And he was a big, strong dude.
Yes, he was.
So you're about to embark on a legendary run that boggles my mind. I can't believe what takes place in January of 99. But prior to that, you make your first trip to Japan in tank race, Yamamiya Kaiichiro.
Yep.
How was your experience in Japan as compared to Brazil and the United States, the audience, the fanfare?
Japan was awesome. Anybody that's ever fought in Japan will probably tell you the same thing. I love fighting there. The fans are awesome. They have so much more respect for the athletes that fight for them than you see anywhere else. In a fight in Japan, typically you will see lines of people after the fight lining up for autographs with the fighters, right? And the line for autographs for the guy that loses is as big as the guy that won. It's incredible because in Japan, like in America, we are obsessed with winners, and rightly so. I mean, competition and winning and success are important.
Of course.
But when it comes to fighting or really any sporting endeavor, like why am I watching this fight? I'm watching this fight because I want to be entertained by the fight. Did the guy that loses that fight play a part in how much I'm entertained? Absolutely, he did. Right? So he deserves just as much respect from me because he put up a good fight. He was willing to go in there and fight and willing to entertain me. And that's the way the Japanese fans have always looked at it. Yes, people like winners. They like winners a little bit more. But like they look at fighters as like you're an athlete. You're willing to go into the cage or the ring to entertain me, and you're willing to risk bodily harm to entertain me. And because of that, I love you. So that's how they treat the sport over there. They don't care much if you're a winner or a loser. The fact that you're an athlete and you're willing to do what you do for the entertainment of the crowd is all they care about.
Jeremy, let me ask you. We talked a little bit about your Brazil experience. I was actually with you at that show in Brazil, the UFC Brazil, and Sao Paulo is like you're a Midwest guy. Was that your first trip overseas? So that's intimidating because let me tell you, we stayed at a Holiday Inn downtown, so it wasn't like one of the like Grand Malias or like one of the big 5-star hotels. It was just a straight Holiday Inn downtown. You walked out and every other person on the street was, a hooker, basically.
And the others were homeless.
and homeless. We were in a downtown scenario like that with like strip joints and things. Tank Abbott leaving to go drink, and it was mayhem. My wife came with me at the time, and she didn't want to go to the show. She said, "I'm going to stay in the hotel, thank you."
Yeah,
she was intimidated too. I speak Spanish. I wasn't that scared. I knew Sergio, but she was worried, and it was so. Take all that. Now you're just 25 million people, but Tokyo is also 25 million people. And Tokyo's completely different. You don't feel intimidated
totally
at all.
different. Yeah, we like, you know, I went to Japan a bunch of times because I fought in rings a bunch and the Pancrase show and stuff. By the end, like I would walk out of the hotel and find my way to the subway and just ask questions, and I'd go all over Tokyo. Way braver. Like I don't care. I'll figure it out. I'll find my way back. Everybody will help me. You know, people are pretty friendly and they'll kind of give you directions as best they can. So yeah, totally different vibe there.
I always tell the story. In Tokyo one time, we went out after the show, partied a little bit. The owners of Pancrase put me in a cab and said, take him to the hotel. I passed out in the cab. I woke up in the cab. The cab sat in front of my hotel for half an hour, put the heat on so I could rest. I don't think I would have gotten that treatment in Sao Paulo.
And that doesn't surprise me either. That's just the culture over there. Super friendly, super accommodating.
Does that make it easier to fight there though? Like, you know,
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, it's way better. You're muted again, Mike.
Do you think the fight should have been a draw?
Which one?
With Yamamiya.
Yeah, probably. I didn't fight real well in that fight. So that was Pancrase's attempt to go back to like true NHB MMA. So headbutts, elbows, all that stuff was legal again. And so I don't know. I didn't fight real well. You know, I was nervous that I don't know why, but I was nervous that if I got hit with an elbow or a headbutt that I might get cut, and I don't want to lose by cut. So I mean, I fought pretty conservatively. So yeah, I mean, I think a draw is fair. It really was a pretty uneventful fight.
Okay. Your January of 1999, we're going to start it at December 31st, 1998 at New Year's Eve knockout, Atlanta, Georgia, against Nick Starks. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, what this man accomplished in January, including this, is compromised what most careers are. So Nick Starks, New Year's Eve knockout. You're not a big party, are you?
No.
Do you smoke weed?
No.
Do you drink?
A little bit, not much.
Huh.
I play video games and I hang out with my dog.
Yeah, no, I can vouch for that, man. In Indiana, we do the shows, and Jeremy was like, after the shows, happy, but sitting around talking, other people might be drinking. Jeremy didn't need any of that stuff. And that's one of the things we talked about earlier that I wanted to give him credit for, is the amount that he puts into fight. Like a lot of people, after the show, they go party, and that's a slide that he never took. He stayed focused. Hey, I got to be at the gym tomorrow, stuff like that. It shows, in the long run. So, more power to him.
Thank you.
So arm triangle, Nick Starks, 521. January 8th, Pat Miletich is at UFC 18th fighting Macacao. And you're not there because you're in Quebec at the IFC tournament, four-man tournament, the very next day, January 9th.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot going on with the IFC.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah, there was.
Let's hear your version before I add my two cents.
I mean, there was a few different people at the helm there, and they would kind of run their own shows individually, all under the IFC banner. There was a lot of unorganized things going on, a lot of maybe not quite honest things going on. I don't really know all the details. I don't know what's going on, but they were just flying by the seat of their pants trying to throw shit together.
So Buddy Albin was the promoter.
Yeah.
What was your impression of him?
I don't know that I never really met him much. I never really had a whole lot to do with that. So say hi, shake hands, go back to my hotel room, that kind of thing. Did
you see him at the hotel bar often?
Maybe. I mean, I didn't go to the bar. So.
Yeah, that was a rumor behind him. Howard Petchler as well. It's a four-man tournament. Just so people at home can understand, the IFC, the early IFCs, you will see their mat laid out, and you'll have like black squares painted on the mat. And the reason is because Buddy Albin had Ultimate Fighting on it, and the UFC had to send him legal work before the event in order to paint it over. He did, and then continued to use the mat another 3 or 4 times. It's like it didn't bother him that there was just these giant black squares. out of that.
Jeremy talks about them flying by the seat of their pants. Was Monte with you at this show, or was he with Pat?
No, I don't think so. So this is back when I started traveling with Travis Fulton a lot, because I basically just told him, I go, look, man, you've got all kinds of contacts. If you've got to fight somewhere, get me a fight on that card. So Travis and I just, traveled a lot to fights.
Yeah.
So,
Well, Monte tells a story about why I was wondering if it was that show, but Monte tells a story about being out with the IFC guys after an IFC show, and everybody's feeling good at the show, and the bill comes for dinner, and nobody, Monte actually had to fucking pay the bill because these guys didn't even have the money for the dinner. That's a Monte story about it. So talk about flying by the seat of their pants.
Yeah, for sure.
So you at the IFC tournament, you beat Rene Tremblay and Josh Dixon, triangle and armbar.
Yeah.
That's January 9th. January 20th, Extreme Boxing in Davenport. You fight Mike Walker.
I remember that one. Mike Walker. Who's that one?
You win by arm triangle.
Yeah, I don't know. So that's where like my record online has got about, I don't know, it's got 30 or 40 fights that are missing, because that's what it was. I mean, I fought every single weekend through 99 and into 2000. I fought as often as I could. I mean, Miguel will tell you, like, everybody that had a little bit of floor space was trying to promote a fight. Everybody wanted to fight. Everybody wanted to watch fights. There were really no commissions. So, I mean, Hook and Shoot was one of the main promotions there that was doing things right. But anybody with 2 fence panels would put them together and throw together fights. So there are tons of fights that I don't even remember the name of the opponent. I don't remember the name of the promoter.
Now, let me ask you something, Jeremy. And this is with respect, because I know at this point, were you so far ahead of the curve against some of those guys on the B circuit that you were kind of, I'm going to go collect my $400 for that because, I should get paid more, but it's 400 easy bucks. So I'm just going to grab it. Is that a little bit of the motivation, or were you just drinking
Looking back, I could say that, but honestly, I don't really know what my mentality was then. I mean, I wasn't working because I was fighting all the time, and I was, I tell people this when I moved to Iowa, that run started in 99, and I planned to get a job and just continue fighting because it was fun to fight. But then, I connected with Travis, and he just found me fights every single weekend. And so I was like, all right, I got this fight this weekend. I'll find a job when I get back. And then, there's another fight and another fight and another fight. And a few months down the road, it turns out I don't need a job because I'm making $400 or $500 a fight every weekend. So I'm paying my bills. And I guess now I'm a professional fighter. So
yeah, you're too busy fighting then to go look for a job.
Yeah. And it never was a conscious decision to say, okay, now I'm a pro. It was just, I'm going to keep fighting because I love it. I'm making enough money to pay my bills, and I get to go to the gym every day and fight every weekend. So, but yeah, there were certainly moments where I was like, look, I'm loving my life. I train all the time. I travel on the weekends. I go fight. I get paid. I don't know that I consciously ever said, this is an easy fight. I'm just going to go get paid. But I'm sure, I had a long run there where I did really well. So I'm sure at one point I was thinking, hey, I'm unbeatable. I'm unstoppable. I'm just I'm just going to keep doing this. So
that was January 20th. January 30th, Hook and Shoot. Miguel, you have him back in Evansville against a pretty tough Ken Parr.
Yeah, I remember Ken. Ken was tough. He was a military guy.
Yeah, wrestling guy
with buzz cut. Yep.
I get, this is one of those matches, I think, where, hey, the guy could be game and stuff. Wrestler would choose. He's a few years behind Jeremy at this point, and it shows.
But
so you would think that might wind up Jeremy's January. That is not true. He fights another fight January 31st against Steve Berger, in my opinion, a Hall of Fame fighter. Yep. Steve Berger with Brian Madden in Belleville, Illinois, Submission Fighting Championships.
Yeah. So
this is spectacular. That show was that open hand? Was that the deal?
I think you could. They use kind of rings rules, so I think you could punch the body, but not on the ground, or you can't punch the head on the ground. So
they He had some type of weird rules that made it sort of not MMA, but
Yeah.
the promoter was prolific. He had a couple of guys like Jermaine Andre that actually went to the UFC and stuff that he was building, and you know, he was smart enough to keep Jermaine away from Jeremy and that sort of stuff, you know, building him up and stuff. But that show was the kind of thing where your buddy Travis Fulton knocked the guy out in the main event.
Yeah.
And shortly afterwards, over the mic, they're like, "Is there a doctor in the house?" You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, no doctors, no nothing. They're trying to find help. They thought the guy swallowed his mouthpiece until they found it like in the 10th row or whatever.
Yeah.
So it was.
Well, that's the way those fights were.
Yeah,
Like
Madden was trying to open his. He had clenched up his teeth, and he used a big pen to try to open his. I remember that scene going on. It's like, wow, you know, it's like at least in hook and shoot, we do a little better than that.
Yeah.
But that area was cursed for promoters. Like Brian Madden, a former pro wrestler, you know, he has an early death. The guy that takes his place, Randy Greenman, is, you know, if you listen to our Steve Berger interview, we break what happened to him. He wound up in 7 different places at the same time, you know, when with dealing with the bikers, you know, and he was, you know, we're dealing with this Sakikibara stuff with Ryzen being canceled. I firmly stand by when there's nefarious money involved in mixed martial arts, the sport's in a good place. That's where you get the best fights.
Yeah.
Just my personal opinion.
When there's just money flowing that freely, people are willing to do some crazy fights for it.
Greenman was washing money through the RSF in Belleville and had some, I mean, he had Shirk Parisian 1 and 2, you know, Lytle Spratt, you know, I'm in.
Yeah.
So after that, you get the call back up. I mean, incredible January run. You fight Chuck Liddell at UFC 19 at 200 pounds. Liddell at this time is managed by Dana White.
Yeah. So this was, I mean, it was just kind of the fight that I had expected back when I fought Frank. So, you know, although now this one was a little bit frustrating. I mean, Chuck was still pretty new on the ground, but I was still, you know, I mean, I was very experienced. Obviously, I want to say 20 fights or something like that. And I felt way more comfortable. But still, I was struggling to take him down. And I remember at one point in the fight thinking like, God damn it, am I just cursed? I can't win a fight in the UFC. I'd fought Frank and lost. I'd fought Braga and lost. But every other fight I fought outside of the UFC, I beat everybody. And I'm thinking, God damn it, I'm just cursed. I cannot win in the UFC. And then eventually I was able to drag him to the ground and choke him. But yeah, I remember that going through my head going, what is this? So yeah.
Do I remember that correctly? It was like an arm triangle. He was on top of you. And
yeah, so
the round ends.
Yeah.
And he doesn't get up.
Yep. Yeah, so I was driving through from a half guard trying to pass his guard, and I had kind of that head and arm position. And right as I drove through, he turned over into my guard. So I squeezed as hard as I could. I knew the round was coming close, and I knew that he was just going to try to wait it out. He wasn't going to tap. And so I knew my only chance was to put him to sleep. And I squeezed as hard as I possibly could. The bell rings, John stops, I let go, and I look over because his head's like right here, right? I look over and his eyes are open and he's drooling. And I was like, oh, he's out. He's
I thought he was out for a minute, and you hear Pat Miletich. You hear Pat Miletich yelling to you.
Yeah.
You keep it on. He's gonna go out.
Yeah. I think he might have been out for 30 seconds or so. Because you can see his leg kind of slides and goes limp a little bit. But, we were just sitting there. I'm squeezing. He's sitting there. We're waiting for the round to end. So nobody was expecting him to move. So the fact that he was still didn't raise any red flags. So
man, that was
pretty
scary.
Definitive win, though.
Thankfully, my first win in the UFC.
Yeah, you got the monkey off your back.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not cursed. Maybe I'm just fighting higher quality opposition in the UFC. Maybe that's why I'm having a little more trouble.
You also went for a heel hook in that fight. I'd never seen you do that up until this point. Was that inspired by what took place with Frank Shamrock?
No, honestly, it was just because I was having such a hard time taking him down. I've never been a big fan of leg locks. I think they're hard to pull off in fights. and then he puts you in a bad spot. You know, there's a lot of downside to him. So I just never been a big fan of him, but I was just having such a hard time getting him to the ground that I was like, fuck it, I'll go after whatever I can get.
You know, at the end of the day, with Chuck's legacy, you know, about to be exploding and what he became, is that your biggest win? Like, what do you like
big at that point or of all?
Yeah, like how, or in your career, like put it in perspective for me, because I mean it's pretty big. That's a pretty big win. Chuck
It's a huge win.
You know, kind of like we spoke earlier. I think it's more important to look at. I mean, you got to rate it based on what it was at the time. You know, at the time, Chuck didn't really know much about submissions. He was a good wrestler and a good kickboxer, but he didn't really know much on the ground. So, I mean, yes, Chuck is Chuck, and he went on to be, you know, an icon in the sport. But back then, that was just a kickboxer with some wrestling. He was a very, very different fighter. Had I won our second fight, I would say that would be, you know, that would be an iconic win. But to beat him before he knew anything, like,
okay,
he was a tough guy, you know, but I don't know that I would put that much stock into that.
Man, dude, that's all you do, Jeremy. It's all you do. Man, Miguel, that's a phenomenal win, incredible. Chuck was at Slow Kickboxing at the time, you know, out of San Luis Obispo. Dude, I think you've got a championship mindset, and I think you always, like, let's just say you bought a car for $500, you would tell somebody, oh, it only cost me $350. You've got a strange way of just kind of looking at your own career.
Well, I've always felt that I am very fortunate to have led and walked the path that I have. The sport has given me an amazing life, and I've had a chance to travel the world and meet amazing people and basically just do what I want all day long, every day. I train and fight and teach, and it's what I love to do. And so I just feel really fortunate to have this life, and it's because of the sport. So it's hard for me to look at it any other way. Like, I'm lucky. I'm fortunate. Yes, I worked hard. Yes, I had some talent, but I mean, how many other people have been in my position that were talented, that were willing to work hard? They did not get to do what I did. I'm lucky. I'm fortunate.
You say you're lucky. In 1999, you fought 21 times and you only lost once.
I had some talent.
Okay, I would prefer to use that word rather than luck. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, I'm lucky that, like, certainly
your talent gave you that.
It took skill to win those fights. Yes, I had talent, certainly, and I worked really hard. But, like, if you were to take the skill level that I had now and put them into somebody now, even if you were to, like, extrapolate that for somebody at that level today, they couldn't do what I did then, because the regulation and the promotions and, you know, the money, it's not there. I was able to fight for $400 a fight and make a living on it, fighting every weekend. That's not legal now. You know, there's not as many promotions now.
So, you know? Wait, hold up, Jeremy. I got to interrupt. Miguel, we talk about the next superstar, the next Conor McGregor, the next Ronda Rousey. You hear that often. Why is we've never heard the next Jeremy Horn?
Because that it can't exist anymore. You can't find the sport would not allow a guy to fight every single weekend for a year and a half straight. Winning or losing is irrelevant. You can't do that anymore. There's not that many promotions. There's not, you know, and the skill level of the skill level of our amateurs today would have destroyed me back then. Right? I mean, but you know, that's how the sport progresses. But that's the thing. So now there's so much more regulation. And that's what I mean when I say I'm lucky. Like, I got dropped into the sport at the right time, that my skill set led me to that. But you couldn't do that now. You couldn't have 40 fights in 1 year now.
You could.
What was your relationship?
Just take a little fraud. You got to commit a little fraud. You know?
You're right.
A couple fake IDs.
Right. What was your dealings with in early Dana White? Obviously, you had met him at that bout.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've always had a different perspective on Dana than other people. He's always been friendly to me, always been good to me. He has always struck me as the kind of guy like, yeah, he's a New Yorker. And he's just kind of got that perspective. Like, I'm going to tell you exactly what's on my mind. I don't care what you think. This is my opinion. If you don't like it, piss off, and yes, people have criticized him for some of the things he's done in the UFC, but, I can't comment on that. That's a harsh business life. And maybe some of those decisions are made rashly, maybe not. I don't know. He's always seemed pretty good to me. And he's always been pretty good to me. And he's been instrumental in building the sport that I've built my life around. So
that's kind of, there's good and bad. People
Sure.
like to highlight the bad, but the reality of the situation is,
yeah,
the three of us wouldn't be connected right now if it weren't for him.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And every time I've been in a UFC, even after I was done fighting in the UFC, I was still coaching a few guys and cornering a few guys, and he always made it a point to come over and say hi and chat with me for a few minutes. He didn't have to do that, but he always did come say hi,
He respects the old guard.
I think so, yeah. So, but yeah, my relationship with him has always been good.
What about Joe Silva?
Same. I really didn't have a whole lot to do with Joe. I met him and say hi to him here and there, but really Monte dealt with him more because that was more like, discussing fights, working out the logistics and the details of fights. So always friendly with Joe, but I didn't really have a whole lot of interaction with him.
When did you start noticing the animosity between Dana and Monte?
Well, that was always there. I think it all kind of started with Jens. Because Monte was pretty shrewd when it came to being a manager, man. He was on point and he would work hard, and he never did anything. Yeah, he never did anything underhanded, but he would push the boundaries and he would fight hard for his fighters. And so I think he writes about it in his book. I don't know if you guys have spoken to Monte, but basically the whole kind of fiasco with re-signing Jens on his contract when he was the champ, I think that's really what burned Dana for Monte, because Monte was, basically standing up for his client, and Dana didn't like that. But I mean, I can't blame him because Monte kind of, Monte pulled the rug out from under him, so to speak, and had him over a barrel and used and pushed it for every advantage he could get. And even if it's honest but harsh negotiation, people feel like they're getting screwed over.
Yeah.
Hey, look at that. So you brought up Jens, and we're talking about your run. When does Jens and Matt Hughes become part of that Miletich team and get added to the mix in there? How does that come about?
I'd have to check the timeline and actually look at when their fights were to see, but it was pretty quickly after. I mean, I was one of the first that moved to train with Iowa, and within maybe a few months to a year, I think Matt and Jens were there. And then a couple of years after that, it wasn't even that long, maybe a year after that, Tim was there. I was only in Iowa for 6 years. So, I mean, we all coalesced pretty quickly.
Okay.
You were the referee at Ultimate Wrestling, June 25th, 1999, when Dan Severn fought Brad Kohler.
Yep.
Could you tell us about your experiences refereeing that incredible bout?
The bout or the whole event? So that's something that I catch a lot of flack for, because that was one that Monte did an amateur show, like a regional amateur, come sign up and you can fight, right? And so that's when Ben Rothwell first fought as well, or one of his early fights.
Right.
I'm sure you guys have seen it, where Ben does the double knee drop onto the guy's back.
Oh no, I haven't. Wow.
You guys don't remember that?
It's fantastic.
So
fantastic.
Monte, it's just open call for fighters. Ben Rothwell signs up. Ben Rothwell's 18. He's 6'4", 280 pounds, whatever he is. He's Ben Rothwell. He's a monster, but he's only 18. He's a young, wild, crazy kid. On the other side of the bracket, the only other heavyweights were there was a guy that was about 5'9" and 350, maybe 400. Should not have been fighting. Was a big fan of the sport, big fan of pro wrestling. This was his chance to live his dream, but he should not have been fighting. And I'm the referee. But Monte's like, hey, that's your opponent, pointing at Ben. Are you sure you want to fight? And the guy's like, yeah, I'm all in. I want to do it. I'm like, Jesus Christ, man, do not do this. You're going to get hurt bad. You should not do this. But he knew what he was in for. Or at least, well, he didn't know what he was in for, but he saw Ben. He's like, yeah, I want to fight. He's like, I'm going to kick his ass. He was all for it. So I go over to the fight, I'm doing their meeting in the corner, and I go over to Ben and I'm looking at him and I go, dude, look at your opponent. Don't fucking hurt this kid. Just, I don't know, take him down and smother him or something. Be nice to him. And Ben is so, he's 18. He's so hyped up. He's just, he's going crazy.
Listening.
Yeah, you're not even listening. So I go, I talk to the other kids, same thing. I'm like, hey, you feel like you're in trouble, tap, blah, blah, blah. I'm trying to give him as many outs as I can. So they go out there,
So it's all in now.
Exactly. And he was all in, The one thing that made him nervous was that he thought he was going to have to take his shirt off in the fight. And Monte's like, no, leave your shirt on. That was it. That's all he cared about. He's like, oh, thank God I can leave my shirt on. I'm good. Let's go fight.
that was his rider, green M&Ms, leave my shirt on.
Yeah, exactly. So
it was
Ben goes
actually
out there,
crowd control. The women would have gone nuts,
Keep him under wraps. But so Ben goes out there and starts lighting him up and just beating the shit out of him, just wildly flailing. The guy falls down and Ben jumps and does like a pro wrestling double knee drop on the small of his back. So, and that's illegal. I can't remember exactly what it was. Maybe you're not allowed to, maybe a knee to the back or something was illegal.
It's a spine attack.
Yeah, something like that. So I stopped the fight right away and I'm like, Ben, go to the corner. I stand the guy up and he's holding his back and he's grimacing and he's hurting really bad. And I'm like, hey, man, if you can't continue, you win. Fight's over. Do you want to continue? I'm like, look, man, what he just did was illegal. If you can't continue, fight's over. You win. And he's like, no, just give me a minute. I'll be okay. I want to keep fighting. I'm like, are you sure? Did you hear what I said? The fight could be over and you win. And he's like, no, I'm good. I want to do it. And I'm like, all right, man, whatever. Like,
that would have been his greatest win ever.
Yeah, I'm like, all right, take a minute. And so I start the fight again. Ben just fucking lights him up. He hits him with some punches, drops him again. This time jumps on him, hits him a couple times. I stop the fight. But what are you going to do? Like, I gave that guy every single chance, not only to get out of the fight, but get out of the fight with a win. And he would not take it. So now that fight, you can find it on
Shades
YouTube
of Anthony
somewhere.
Smith.
Yeah. But you can find it on YouTube and people criticize me. They don't know it's me. They're like, oh, that referee fucking sucks. How did you let that happen? I'm like, dude, you guys don't know. I was trying to give that guy a way out. I was trying to give him a win and he would not take it, man. He wanted to go down like a warrior. So credit to him, man. He should not have been in there, but he stepped in and did his best and he would not take the easy way out.
You know what? You got to give him credit where credit's due.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Credit. Now, let's talk about the main event because that was definitely not the highlight of that night. Normally, you would say, man, that's a fantastic story. What happened at the next fight? Yeah. No siree.
Yes,
Brad Kohler, Dan Severn.
Yeah, so I didn't realize what was coming until about halfway through.
You're getting blindsided.
Yeah, I didn't know. I'm talking to him. I'm doing the, meeting in the corner and blah, 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 going through the rules and everything. And then they start. And at first, they're selling it okay. It looks okay. And then at one point, they're in a clinch, and I can't remember who throws who, but they move to the corner, and one guy fucking belly to bellies the other guy out of the ring. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, this is getting a little bit hokey here. What's going on? Now I'm watching a little closer, and I'm seeing that they're kind of leaning into each other. They're, and I'm like, okay, Jesus Christ, I'm
in the middle of a fake fight. And I just realized it.
And you can kind of see, like, at first I'm pretty attentive and I'm trying to make sure, there are two big guys thrashing around in there. It's going to be dangerous. Somebody falls out of the ring. And then you see my demeanor go from like this to like this. And I'm like, all right, you guys just fucking do whatever you're going to do.
Hurry up.
I don't have anything else to say anymore. So, yeah, but
I think that fight ended with a 10 count out of the ring, though. Am I correct?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, that sounds right. They go out of the ring. Somebody can't come back in. An injury of some sort or something like that. I don't know.
Fantastic. You know what was crazy? The crowd's going nuts the entire time.
Oh yeah, they were eating it up.
The crowd thoroughly enjoyed that. Yeah. It's wild. Pat Miletich fights Shonie Carter, Extreme Challenge 27. Pat is the current UFC world champion. Shonie comes in. He's known as Hollywood at this time. He's 25-1-2. Miletich is 29-2-2. this was an absolute dogfight.
Yeah.
Did you expect that going into this with Pat?
No, honestly, I thought Pat would have finished him a lot sooner. I guess Pat had a little bit of a shoulder issue going on in that fight, so he couldn't really throw punches as well as he normally does. And Shonie, of course, is a gamer. Shonie's very deceptive. So his stand-up is good. His wrestling is very good. His jiu-jitsu is good, and he's strong. And he's an old school pro that knows how to survive, basically. So, he was able to make it a fight.
And
so Shonie,
actual ring time, Shonie's up there too.
Oh yeah.
He's the weekend fight every weekend kind of thing.
Yeah, there was a bar in Chicago where him and Brian Gassaway both were kind of like the reigning champions of their weight class, and it was the same thing. Like they'd go in for the weekend and like, hey, take all challengers. Anybody want to fight? Step in and you can fight. And Shonie and Brian both, granted, they're fighting half drunk bums that don't train, but they're getting 10 or 15 fights a weekend each.
Yeah.
So that ring time builds up, and it brings you just a level of composure and focus that it doesn't matter how good your opponent is. It's beneficial.
So it was called the Tropicana, and it was a Hispanic nightclub where they had a club champion, and you and one friend could drink for the rest of the night if you had won. And the club champion was a Hispanic guy that Shonie ended up beating up. And Shonie's probably got about 90 fights just at that bar alone.
I believe it.
I used to have them on VHS. Like Shonie put them all on VHS for me. I'd have to really dig through my stuff to see if I still have it. Yeah. So Shonie's got a lot of ring time. If you watch Miletich Shonie 1, if you look at what takes place in that, I defy you to try to say what year it took place in without looking at the age of the video, because it looks like a modern fight. It is incredible.
Yeah, both guys very skilled, very evenly matched, and both of them very well rounded. Even striking, even wrestling, even jiu-jitsu. You don't see that very often, especially in fights that old.
When we interviewed Shonie, he said, "Man, I was so confident going into that fight. I paid for my own travel. I brought friends with me." He's like, "I was going to go fight the world champion who I knew I could beat." And I'm like, "Well, what happened in it?" He's like, "I found out what it was like to fight an actual world champion. That's what happened. No excuses. He was the better man." He's like, "That fight really hurt me because I wanted it so bad." Shonie says he cried the whole way home from Davenport to Chicago.
Shonie's a good dude, man. He was good for the sport.
Absolutely. January 15th, 2000, you fight for Jamie Levine. Oh, Pat Miletich fights for Jamie Levine against Pele Landis.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you say it was with Jens Pulver. I think this is pre-UFC purchasing, or Dana purchasing UFC. Yeah. But I think this is kind of when Monte may have kind of rubbed some people the wrong way.
Sure. Yeah, it's very possible. And that's the thing. Monte would go out and do whatever he could that was in the best interest of his fighters. And he wouldn't intentionally screw over promoters, but he didn't really care. The promoters were not his priority. His fighters were his priority. So he was going to do what's best for them. So, putting Pat into a fight like that was, probably not in the best interest of the UFC and Dana.
No. So for people at home, he fights Pele Landis, who is at the time people were arguing pound for pound. He was number one in the world. And Miletich fights him. The rumor was Pat went in with a shoulder injury and had to fight with a lidocaine shot.
His back was really messed up. He had broken his back, so he had constant issues with it all the time, and it was flaring up. His back was in really bad shape.
Here, this is what I got.
Pat was pretty plagued with injuries through most of his career.
He had a lidocaine shot into his sacroiliac joint, is what I found.
I think that's low spine, pelvis area.
Okay, so you're right. Yeah. So he loses corner stoppage with Pele. You were obviously there.
Yep.
What was it like dealing with Jamie Levine as a promoter?
The same card, I think, when I fought Nogueira, because we all 3 or 4 of us fought on that card. Levine was fine. I mean, again, Monte dealt with him more than I did because that's more promoter manager talk. But I was fine with him. Again, I hide in my hotel until it's time to go fight, and then I go fight. I really don't talk to too many people.
And March 1st, 2000, Mark Coleman enters the Grand Prix. What was it like having Coleman in your gym?
Pretty intense. Mark's a good dude. But yeah, he brought it to the gym. The one thing that we always, at least that I always tried to help encourage for him, was developing a little bit better technique when it comes to jiu-jitsu, better understanding of it. And his mentality was always like, I'm going to train as hard as I fight. I just want to come in. I just want to beat my head against my opponent. That's kind of the wrestler mentality. I mean, it's not to say that wrestlers don't have technique, because they certainly have a high level of technique, but they have an equally high level of drive and aggressiveness. And that's a large part of wrestling, and that's what Mark always brought to the table was, I'm coming at you 100% until I can't anymore. So I was.
Did Matt Hughes ever get a takedown against Mark Coleman?
It's possible. I mean, I didn't see all their matches. Matt was a really good wrestler. Mark was huge though, and also a very good wrestler. So possible.
Did Steve Rusk get a takedown against Mark Coleman?
I would think probably. Steve Rusk was also a very good wrestler, and he was more like 220, so much closer to Mark's size. So yeah, that wouldn't surprise me a bit.
Ladies and gentlemen, in our comment section, Mark Coleman is now claiming that none of those happened. Just an FYI.
Hey, I got a question for you, Jeremy. You talked at the beginning of the interview about like when you went up to Miletich and stuff, and they trained rough, and there was no malice. But as things developed here, Coleman's a guy that brings a level of intensity. Hughes, in particular, was known as being mean in the gym, and there may have been some malice in some of those later training. I heard one. I think you choked Graveson out, like you were on your third or fourth choke out, or something like somebody choked Graveson out multiple times just to prove the point. It's like it got pretty mean in there.
So yes, let me clarify. When I said there was no malice, I meant when I started, I didn't experience any malice from any of those guys. As the gym developed and more fighters came to train, yes, there started to be a bit of a territorial vibe where if you're going to come train, you have to kind of prove that you're capable of, staying here. And I didn't really do much of it because I was always, I don't know. I'm always like the good Samaritan, good shepherd, trying to help.
You're looking at the Obi-Wan Kenobi
kind of information. Yeah. So yeah, I saw a lot of guys get beat up. I saw a lot of guys get roughed up. But again, it wasn't malicious. It was like, look, I'm going to push you as hard as I can because I want to make sure, number one, that you're capable of being here. And number two, I want to make you better. So I'm going to push you as hard as I can. And I'm not doing it out of malice, but I am going to fuck you up. I don't know if your intent matters much when the result is still, I'm going to knock you unconscious, but I'm doing it for your own good. I mean, I don't know. So yeah, I mean, everybody in Iowa was always really cool. Everybody wanted to train hard. I never saw anybody getting beat up maliciously, but I saw a lot of guys get beat up. But it was just, if you can take it, take it. If you can give it, give it. And there was no malice to it.
Miguel, we're coming up on a 2-hour mark. Jeremy, I am pleased. We'd like to continue with your career, but could we open it up to some general questions?
Absolutely.
In the future, we need you again.
I would love to, man. I love chatting with you guys. It's awesome to reminisce and kind of go back and claw through the history. Yeah, it's awesome.
All right. You've rolled with a couple people that I need to know about. Rulon Gardner, Olympian.
Oh man. He's his standing wrestling obviously is top notch, but his size is, that's a huge weapon for him. Like I could hold him in my guard for a few moments, but as soon as I got a little out of position and he put 500 pounds of weight on my leg, I can't stop him. If he gets to side control on top of you, he could post up on his arms and legs as tall as he possibly could and arch his back like a cat. And there was still 300 pounds of weight on my chest. he's just such a huge man that, like, if he's on top of you, you're in trouble. It's just all there is to it.
Were you surprised he didn't stick with fighting?
No, it didn't really seem like it was in his mentality. He was like, I've seen it a lot, and I don't know if he really fully falls into this, but there are some people who are fighters and there are some people who are competitors that happen to be good at fighting, right? If you're a fighter, then it doesn't, you get your teeth knocked out and your nose broken and you're still coming forward. If you're a competitor and somebody punches you and breaks your nose, like, maybe had enough, right? He struck me as more of a competitor than a fighter. And maybe that's just only as it pertained to MMA, because I know in wrestling, and I know in the rest of his life, he really dealt with a lot of adversity that would indicate that he's a fighter. But he just didn't really seem like it was for him.
Okay. What about Jake Shields?
Same. Talented, very, very, very talented, good grappler, but just didn't strike me as a fighter. He was a competitor that happened to be very good at what he was good at, Perfect example. Jake Shields, competitor. Nick and Nate Diaz, fighters. It's got nothing to do with your level of technique. It's about your emotional state when you go into that competition. Nick and Nate Diaz are fighters. Jake Shields is a competitor. He wants to win. He wants to win a match.
What do you consider yourself?
I'm a fighter. I go into a fight, I want to hurt somebody. I'm not here to win a competition. I'm here to fuck you up. And coming along with that means I'm going to win, but I'm here to beat you. I'm here to hurt you.
Jeremy, like you mentioned, Jake Shields, competitor, Nick Nate Diaz, fighter. You like to stay in your room. You don't drink. You don't use drugs. You're not at the bar getting rowdy. You consider yourself a fighter, but did you have many street fights growing up?
Not really. I mostly kept to myself. I had a couple of street fights, but really, like, if you're not on the streets, you're not getting in street fights. So I was always at the gym or I was at home, so I didn't do much.
You're obviously a fighter. That's not where my question is. It's just the path of a fighter is just, it couldn't be more different than you mentioning the Diaz brothers and that of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's saying, a lot of times, maybe if I had grown up in a different environment, I might have had a different path. I might have been in more street fights, but I had a paper out when I was a kid, and then I would go to the gym and train, and then I'd come home and play video games till I went to bed. So, I wasn't the type to be out running the streets. I just didn't have any interest in that because I was at the gym. Very similar to Nick and Nate Diaz. I know they used the jiu-jitsu gym a lot as a hideaway from the streets, but obviously they were in a much rougher area. So maybe the streets were forced on them a bit more and they couldn't really avoid it. I don't know. I don't want to comment on their lives, but I know that, those guys are both fighters through and through.
Now, you did not go to Japan for the Grand Prix. Am I correct?
With Coleman? No, I didn't.
When did you guys, do you know when they would have found out when Mark, Kerr, and Coleman were on the same side of the bracket?
No, I don't remember.
Damn.
I got a question for you too. You're in Utah now, and I think Walt Bayless is from out there. He's a guy that there's a lot of one reference I have for him is one reference we have for him is Mark Schultz, who's about an elite wrestler, and he has a lot of respect for him. But Walt's a guy that was a trainer without a lot of that fight actual experience that we can see. Have you ever rolled with him? Have you ever had?
No, I never did. When I moved out here, I believe he had moved to New York. So Walt Bayless was one of those guys that's just weirdly talented in whatever he chooses to do. So if he decides he's going to be in martial arts, he's going to be really good at it. What I had heard when I moved out here, I had heard he was in New York and he had decided to become an artist, a painter. And so I saw some of his artwork and it's incredible. Kind of the old school, the old Conan the Barbarian comic books, kind of that kind of graphical style.
Frank Frazetta style?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Really good artwork. He's just gifted in whatever he decides to do. So when I moved out here, the gym that I trained at was run by a guy named Griffin Reno, excuse me, who was one of Walt's top students. So I got to train with some of the Walt Bayless guys, but never himself. So
he's kind of a controversial figure. The people that
Very much so.
There's a lot of questions, more questions than I believe that there are answers, but
yeah,
people such as yourself and Mark Schultz, who obviously we admire, both say, no, man, that guy's very talented. Yeah.
I saw the video of him wrestling with Mark Schultz, and Bayless was, he was a big, strong athlete, right? He's 6'2", 250 pounds, I think, something like that. And he could reportedly do one-arm pull-ups.
Oh my God.
I mean, that's a freak strong athlete. So if you take any kind of athlete like that and give them any measure of technique, they're going to be a formidable opponent. And I watched, I had seen some of his Walt Bayless's instructional videos. He had a good sense of he's not dead. He has a good sense of knowledge and leverage and stuff like that. So yeah, but all of that is going to be enhanced by his high level of athleticism and strength.
Wow. Miguel, that's a 2-hour mark, buddy.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks,
no problem, man. I would love to come back anytime you guys want.
All right. We would like to continue this. Maybe next week we can get another recording session in. We'd like to map out your whole career. We did it with Chris Brennan already. Wildly popular, actually, with their listeners. And there's very few people that fit the Chris Brennan, Jeremy Horn category. And we've got to do it, bro. We got to do it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Wednesdays are usually pretty good for me. So if you guys want to keep it up on Wednesdays, my schedule's pretty flexible. Mornings are always good, but
Wednesday mornings.
We kind of play it day by day. So yeah.
Perfect.
Good. Cool. All right. We're signing off here. Lights Out Podcast, another deep dive. Jeremy Horn, your class is school's out, I guess, right? That's
it.
For now, yes.
Thanks,
Thank you, brother.
Check out the full interview on iTunes, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms.